what's going on within the room.
That's a good point. You can watch the live stream on the Parliament Live website if that would be helpful for you. I don't know if there's any delay between that and yeah. That is an option for you, Dave, if that would be helpful.
I think I'll just muddle through like this. I mean, if you
welcome to this meeting of the Public Services Committee and our inquiry into child maintenance. We have three witnesses today. I'm going to start by asking them if they will introduce themselves. Sam.
Good morning, my name's Sam Morfey. I'm the CEO of Both Parents Matter. We're a national separated parenting charity and we've been going for 50 years and we work to allow children to have a relationship with both parents post-separation.
I'm Sarah Lambert. I'm Head of Policy and Campaigns at Gingerbread, the charity for single parents.
Dave?
Hi, I'm Dave Hawkey. I'm Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Public Policy Research Scotland, and I've been working on a collaborative project with One Parent Family Scotland and Fife Gingerbread, who are separate to Gingerbread, on the child maintenance service.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us today. I'll start with the first question, just try to get a sense of how you think things are going at the moment, how effective it is. So, how effective do you think the support for parents is? And we were thinking of both the family-based arrangements and when making an arrangement through the child maintenance service. There's a risk in an inquiry like this that we only hear about the problems, and we're making the assumption that for lots of cases it goes perfectly well. So I think what we're asking you in this question is, overall, how effectively do you think the children are looked after when they find themselves in families where these situations arrive? Sam, do you want to start off?
I think our experience is it's mixed. And just to give you some context, the dads who we're dealing with predominantly, and it's predominantly dad, we also help mums as well, these are paying parents who want to be involved in their children's life. So they come to us, they come to support because they want to be involved. So they are very much on the we want to involve, we want to pay, rather than, and there are dads out there who aren't paying, we recognise that. So the experience is very mixed. I think the big issue we have, and I'm probably going to be a bit of a stuck record on this, is it's the affordability of the maintenance payments. And our view is that this really is at the key problem with the arrears building up and enforcement, issues of enforcement in order to get money to the children who need it most. So I think everything has to be looked at in that context. This does seem to predominate. And the dads who come to us, and it is predominantly dads, they're often in a bad state. And the issue they have is that if they're going through separation, they're struggling to hold down their job, they're struggling with mental health, they're not seeing their children, to then deal with a child maintenance service, which can often come across as quite austere and severe. It's almost like the final straw in many cases. So I think it has to be looked at in that context. And I think the issue predominantly is that they feel that they're treated like pariahs. They're trying to do the best for the children, they want to be involved, but once they get involved in the child maintenance service, they understand the reason behind it, but it's just the actual way it's dealt with. But more particularly, I think, and this does come back to the calculation, in terms of family-based arrangements, I think we recognise family-based arrangements is the best, most sustainable way forward. The issue we find is that often when you go onto the child maintenance website, you're directed quite quickly onto this calculation tool, which is in some ways is a very useful tool to work out what your maintenance would be. But the problem is I think it sometimes sets unrealistic expectations, particularly with the receiving parent, because it doesn't take account of the various variations which you can have in maintenance. It just gives you a very upline figure. And the danger then, if we are trying to go down the path of amenable family-based arrangements, it often sets up unrealistic expectations about what the maintenance could be and often sets parents into a conflict situation. So I imagine we'll come on to...
We've got two questions that look at those, so we'll not go too far down that road at the moment.
So I think it's that tool actually doesn't work as well as it could do in terms of allowing parents to come to a family-based arrangement.
Okay, thanks. And Sarah?
So from our perspective, we would say that the support available in getting a successful maintenance arrangement it simply isn't working right now. Of those who use the collect and pay part of the CMS, we have the latest statistics around that were published yesterday, and it showed consistently, every quarter these statistics are published, and we're seeing the same thing time and again, that under half of the people using that service are getting over 90% of what they should be getting, and consistently a third are getting nothing at all. Gingerbread recently published some new research where we talked to both paying parents and receiving parents, and as part of that research, we found that those who either have no arrangement at all or who have a private arrangement, the vast majority are not happy that that's the situation they're in. They're not happy with the arrangement that exists. And that recent survey also showed that 57% of parents with care who had any sort of arrangement were consistently recovering the full amount that they should be recovering. So, across the system, receiving parents are not getting the money that they should be getting. And as a result, we see significantly higher levels of poverty amongst single parents. And we really see that there's a priority for government here in looking at that as part of their forthcoming child poverty strategy. I also just wanted to mention kind of support within the system. I think we'll come a bit more detail on that.
Okay. Just hang on to that, because I wanted to particularly address that, and just after we've done the first round, if that's okay with you. Dave, what's your initial reactions?
Yeah, so I think there are sort of various, obviously different parents have different circumstances and different sort of routes through to child maintenance, and they face different levels of barriers. So within our project in Fife, part of the project has been to employ a caseworker who has been sort of running a test and learn sort of pilot working with parents. And she's found that generally there's a sort of a lack of confidence in terms of signposting people towards child maintenance, and generally sort of a miasma of kind of myths and misinformation around the system. From thinking about the different kinds of circumstances that parents find themselves in, broadly, sort of her work has broken down that about 60% of parents sort of are in a sort of what she describes as the primary category. So this is parents who are supported with sort of basic advice and signposting, so help to sort of start their child maintenance journey. About 20% sort of have more intermediate kind of levels of need. So this is the kind of support that could be sort of wrapped up into a broader package of financial inclusion. And then there's a final 20% where the cases are really quite complex, and these are complex with long-term needs, and they require a sort of within the current system, sort of a dedicated casework support in order to help them navigate what is a sort of a confusing and difficult system.
Okay, I want to come back to this question about other organisations. How possible, how easy is it to link into the other support organisations like family hubs? I mean, the government's done a lot of trials of that at the moment. It's quite an issue following various previous reports. I'm not sure from what we've heard so far that there's any connection between what the government's doing in terms of child maintenance support and where they could get help within the statutory system. I realise that they come to organisations like yourselves for help, but sometimes they may miss out on that. So should it be more possible to connect people to structures within the government service or the government-funded services that will help them in times like this? Sarah, do you want to start, because you were halfway down this question route to begin with?
So, I think you heard this from officials last week, actually, that the CMS itself is actually quite insular. It doesn't reach out. It doesn't have those relationships. The officials last week talked about, we have plans to talk to the family hubs, but it is not something that they're progressing with at the moment. And that separation, the Fife Gingerbread pilot that Dave talked about, one of the things that was really interesting looking at some of that was actually the real lack of confidence that the sort of wider system, whether that's statutory or non-statutory services, if you are used to advising people about kind of their finances, if you're used to advising people about social security, a lot of those people just don't have the confidence to also advise people about the CMS. We had a meeting recently with kind of the wider sort of poverty and social security sector, and that was something they said had really changed from the CSA, actually, in the way that social security has in some ways rightly been divorced from child maintenance,
yes.
it has also meant that those services have been divorced too, and there's a real lack of confidence amongst both statutory and non-statutory services.
I think that's the cause of it, because historically there was a real problem having linked.
Potentially, but I think there was also that focus in the reform about trying to push people towards the having their own private arrangements, the family-based arrangements, and I think that kind of has also meant that the CMS, and again the official saying last week, we don't go out and advertise ourselves.
No.
We don't say that we're there. So quite often, I think that's a real challenge.
Want to come in, Sam or Dave?
I mean, I think there's definitely opportunities there with reducing parental conflict programme, which is run through the DWP.
Yes.
Obviously, family hubs I've already mentioned. Possibly through mediation as well. As I understand it, the mediation voucher is only available if it's connected to a family contact dispute. Whether or not there's the ability or the feasibility to have mediation separately in child maintenance arrangements but obviously normally it is connected to a child contact dispute. So I think it's just, through the Family Mediation Council, through the other mediation bodies, if people can be talking about maintenance much more and saying that a family-based arrangement is the way to go, if at all possible, then I think there are obviously other avenues where it can be promoted.
Dave, do you want to add to anything there?
No, I think those responses cover it. I think sort of there's a lot of scope for a much better integration across services.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Okay. Baroness Cash, do you want to do the second question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hardly need to talk data to you because you live it and breathe it, obviously. But, as we know, 41% of families don't have any kind of child maintenance arrangements, and that's up 16% from 2011-12 before the 2012 reforms. I mean, obviously it peaked in 2015 and it is coming down, but that's still an unacceptable high level. So why do you think that has increased since the 2012 reforms, and what do you think the impact has been of that increase?
I mean, Sarah might be better placed to answer this, as they do more data and research than we do. We just look at the actual experience of the parents we're dealing with. We do collect data around that as well, of course. I mean, it may well be, and I think this has probably been optimistic, that more people are able to make their own amicable arrangements and therefore aren't on the radar of the CMS. I think that's probably unlikely, though. I think it's mainly just because we are often dealing with, certainly in the case which we deal with, very soured, often very toxic relationships. They may well not want to have contact with each other through the CMS, even though I understand that you can have contact. You can use the direct pay without having that contact. But it's more mainly hearing bad stories about the CMS, either your own experience or hearing it from another party, about the approach they take, which can often be quite austere when you're at your absolute lowest ebb. It could be about hearing about the unaffordability of the calculations. So I almost make the analogy that it's almost like a really, really bad tax system. If a tax system's going to work, it's got to be affordable, it's got to be reasonable, it's got to be seen to be fair. And I think the impression, quite rightly in some circumstances, is that this is a bad system to get into, may well be putting people off.
Sarah, you touched on the fact that you felt that the 2012 reforms were supposed to drive more private arrangements, but what do you think your experience is in reality of?
Yes, so we asked separated parents this very question in our most recent research, and what we found there was a deep lack of trust in the CMS. Just 10% said that they were happy with it. So of those who either had a private arrangement or no arrangement at all, just 10% said that they were happy with that arrangement. 29% were concerned that if they used the CMS, that would make coercive or abusive behaviour of the other parent worse. 24% had heard negative things about the CMS, and 24% had used the CMS in the past and had found that it hadn't worked for them, so they didn't want anything to do with it anymore. Sort of overall, kind of in more qualitative stuff, so actually this kind of repeats some of it a little bit, but it's about the fear of repercussions was kind of a big theme that came through, obviously through the parents with care, the poor reputation of the CMS. In some cases, insufficient financial support. They kind of looked at what they thought they might get, particularly where the non-resident parent was on a lower income, and kind of thought, actually, do I want to deal with this government body that nobody seems to like very much if I'm only going to get an extra £7 a week or whatever it was. And similarly, where the non-resident parent had quite complex financial situation, whether that was because they had different assets or they were self-employed again, that they'd heard or they kind of were aware that sometimes it could be quite complex to kind of wade through what they would then be entitled to, so that was putting them off as well. So it's not a system, people aren't proactively deciding to have a private arrangement or or no arrangement at all from our findings. It was more that they didn't want to go through the CMS.
Thank you. Dave, did you want to chip in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely echoes what we've heard from speaking with both parents on both sides, and this sort of sense that it's a complex system, and it gets described like sort of trying to navigate an under-resourced call centre, and feels like negotiating a phone contract instead of sort of trying to arrange something that's quite fundamental to your child's well-being. One thing that I would sort of encourage the committee to think about is about sort of what the intention of those reforms were in 2012 and what that might mean for sort of how the government should approach child maintenance in future. So those reforms were intended to reduce the costs of running the child maintenance service by encouraging more families into family-based arrangements. And I think some of that was justified by recognising that those families who do set up family-based arrangements have sort of better outcomes, but the logic there is arguably somewhat backwards, in that it's the parents who have perhaps the sort of high level of resource and sort of the more harmonious relationship to start with that are better able to set up a family-based arrangement. So we see that what's happened with the reforms, the DWP caseload has gone down, and there are more families who have family-based arrangements. But if you think about sort of the reduction in the DWP caseload and where that's gone, it's gone about twice as much into families having no arrangement as it's gone into families having a family-based arrangement. And I think if you try and trace through what those reforms actually were and the kinds of things that were being done, so sort of reducing those the signposting, creating sort of the kind of gatekeeping function of the direct pay system to so that people wouldn't be able to access collect and pay directly, and the introduction of fees. These are all sort of parts of the system that have the effect, if not the purpose, of disincentivizing parents from actually using the service. So if you're thinking about that as trying to incentivize people to go into family-based arrangements, you have to sort of acknowledge that the flip side of that sort of for an incentive to actually work, it has to be aversive. And that means that by building those features into the way that the system works, then you create the risk of sort of exacerbating and escalating tensions and conflict. And we've definitely found that when we've polled parents, we've found that about a third of parents we spoke to who have engaged with the CMS reported that it increases conflict. So I think just trying to think through, trying to set up a system that's trying to push parents out into other kinds of arrangements may have sort of pretty deleterious consequences, both for the parents who are using the service and also for putting more parents off from using the service.
Thanks, that's really clear.
Lord Lamming.
Thank you very much indeed. Can we just pursue this point that's just been made a little further, in that we recognise that separation is almost always a very difficult time for families. And looking at the proportion of separated families with no child maintenance arrangement, I wondered whether, in your experience, you could begin to quantify for us how much the threat of abuse features in all of these arrangements, or whether or not it's a marginal thing.
I mean, obviously, I'm looking at it from the paying parents' perspective, and I am looking at it from the perspective of the dads who come to us. As I say, there is almost a common thread is that they tend to be quite empathetic people who have just had a bad relationship, and the reason they come to us is because they want to see their children. They've been involved in their children beforehand, and it may well be that in many cases they have been in a toxic relationship, an abusive relationship themselves, And the concern which they have is that they're now going into a situation where they can't see their children, they are struggling to hold down a job, they've been kicked out of their home, they might be sofa surfing or moved in with their parents or in shared accommodation. And then essentially this is another form of abuse that which has been held against them, this ongoing kind of financial abuse, that there is an opportunity through using the calculation tool to come up with payments which are, in many cases, certainly for the lower paid, are unaffordable because of the way the calculations are calculated. That in that case, this is almost like an ongoing form of domestic abuse, which they're trying to grapple with themselves, and they're trying to deal with their main concern, which is being able to have a relationship with their children. And this is essentially another way for that kind of coercive control to continue. Having said that, they have to be involved. Of course, they have responsibilities to pay for their children, and they recognise that. Is trying to find a way where they can make they can step up and fulfil their responsibility to be the parent they want to be, and not to be feeling that they are being another form of abuse is being directed at them, and it's almost being state sanctioned through the CMS. That's their perspective, that's how they feel. You've got to understand that this is the mental state which many of them are in. So if the way the CMS currently operates, with the way the calculations work, with the general approach which they take towards paying parents, Dave talks about it's almost like paying a phone bill, just kind of the lack of empathy from CMS. These are certain things which they could be properly trained at to have empathy for the actual situation which these paying parents are going through. It's just this kind of collective feeling that the whole system is against them. And that can only mean that they are more likely to withdraw, they're less likely to step up to their responsibilities, and less likely to fulfil the role which I think we all want them to fulfil.
So, as I said previously, our research showed that of those who had a private arrangement or no arrangement at all, around a third, that they'd made that choice because they didn't want to use the CMS because they thought it would make the abusive or coercive behaviour worse. What we also know is actually increasingly the vast majority, it's increasingly the case that those cases that the CMS do deal with do have domestic abuse as part of what's going on, and there is no way for them to have a private arrangement, which is why they end up with the CMS. So previously the CMS used to have a £20 fee to apply for it, and one of the key reasons that you could get that fee waived was because you were a survivor victim of domestic abuse, and we knew at that point there was about 56% of cases were being waived for that reason. So increasingly those changes, the 2012 changes, have meant that the caseloads increasingly involve domestic abuse, and then where people aren't using the CMS, it is the fear of repercussions that is a significant factor in that.
Dave, do you want to add to that?
So just on the point about the number of sort of people who don't have arrangement due to sort of domestic abuse, there is sort of evidence in the Family Resources Survey. Looking at that sort of with the data just in the Family Resources Survey, it's about somewhere between 15 and 20% of parents who don't receive maintenance report that one of the reasons for that is that the other parent would be violent or abusive, or that pursuing maintenance would cause friction. That's something that we're able to look at through the Family Resources Survey. The DWP has sort of like a richer database of maintenance arrangements, and so they could probably give you a sort of a more precise figure than that.
Lord Lancaster.
Mr. Morfey, you're suggesting that the CMS need to have better interpersonal relationships, better handling, more sympathetic and so on. But dealing with the public ain't easy. You don't have to be an MP for very long before you become quite cynical about some of the people who come to you. Now, we heard, I think, from the CMS last week that there are some men in particular who so hate their partner that they prefer to go to prison rather than pay the money they can afford to pay. So how can you be so empathetic in those situations, and don't you accept that whatever else other training you could give the CMS, they're going to be dealing with some people who just aren't going to like what they're doing?
Of course, I understand that, and I can understand why they need to take a more forthright approach with them. But I have to say, this is not the experience of the dads who we deal with. The dads who we deal with want to be involved, they want to make a contribution, they want to pay. And I think these are the dads who surely, as a society, we want to step up and have the ability and the capacity to be able to step up to their to their responsibilities. And if they are finding that on top of everything else they're dealing with, they're then dealing with people who treat them like pariahs. And you'll suggest that some people deserve to be treated that way, and I would agree with you on that. Those aren't the people we represent. The parents we represent want to be involved, and these are the dads we want to step up. And I just think there have to be some understanding that they're often going through the court system, they're often struggling to hold down their job, they've got these massive list of additional expenses which they didn't have before. If they're on a low pay situation, they have lost their child-related benefits. They're in a pretty desperate situation. Just to let you know, we do survey upon our members, and 40% of the people who come to us have suicidal thoughts. We help them through that, and we try to reduce that, but that is the situation of the type of population who I think make up the majority of people who want to pay child maintenance. So when you're dealing with all those issues, I think some training to the CMS to recognise that for those people who want to pay, they need to be treated that, yes, they do have responsibilities, they do need to pay, and this is a statutory body, but they do need to recognise that they often need to be helped through and need to be encouraged to make that contribution, and they need to recognise that this is their opportunity with a fairer system. And it's okay, so there's more fundamental issues than how you deal with someone on the phone, the calculation being the main one, but ancillary to that, the way they deal with people, recognising they are human beings going through very, very tough circumstances. In many, many cases, I think that would help.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Lord Mott, do you want to take it to the next question, please?
I thank you for everything you've said so far. I was struck, Dave, Sam, by the sort of the use of the word affordability that's come through quite a bit. So my first question is around the calculation. How far does the way the Child Maintenance Service calculate maintenance levels reflect the realities of modern family structures, such as co-parenting or multi-income families? And perhaps if we can start with you, Sam.
I think it's very much based on the traditional model where the dad goes out to work, has all the money, has all the resources, and the mum stays at home and has the main caring responsibilities. Since the time which we've been in operation, 50 years, good things have happened. The father is stepping up and playing more of a caregiving role and wants to be more involved in the raising of his children. The mother has more opportunity to go out to work and is not solely expected to be the main carer. And that's a very positive thing which we are in favour of. The problem is the Child Maintenance Service doesn't actually reflect that. And I think the big issue for those dads who want to stay involved and want to continue those caregiving responsibilities post-separation is the problem is that the calculation does not take account of the additional costs which they have in order to fulfil that responsibility. There is some recognition of additional travel costs and additional accommodation costs if the child has been moved away to the other end of the country, but it's absolutely minimal. It doesn't even touch the surface of the additional costs which they have to deal with. Contact centre costs don't come into it, and when you add on to the fact that it's being purely based on the paying parent's income, when in many cases the receiving parent is earning more. I mean, we've probably all seen the CSJ Centre for Social Justice report. Young women are earning more than young men. This traditional idea that it's the man who earns all the money clearly is and thankfully is no longer applies. So I think there has to be recognition of the ability and the assets of the receiving parent, and there has to be more recognition of the additional costs for those dads who want to stay in contact, those paying parents who want to stay in contact. Their costs go through the roof. They lose all their child benefit related through social security. They lose all those. So if you have a system which actually penalises them in many cases for wanting to stay in contact because the additional costs become too much, then I think you can look at that and say, well, this is a calculation which no longer is fit for purpose, where we have, thankfully, much more caregiving and sharing of the care between both parents.
I guess I just want to challenge a little bit that idea that single parents have got lots of money, given that we know that single parents are almost twice as likely to be living in poverty as coupled households. So I think it's really important to recognise that. In terms of the calculation, what we hear from parents with care is that there's a real challenge with the way that assets and non-earned income is taken into account, and we did hear a bit about that from the officials last week. And there's been some positive moves from the CMS. They do have plans, or did have plans, to be able to calculate the unearned income as part of the initial assessment. At the moment, you have to go through a variation request, so you have to go back to the CMS, and given the levels of frustration people have in terms of actually contacting the CMS and being on the phone for hours on end to try and get that to happen, it's really important that that change does happen. So that's a key thing that I think they have ready to set out how it would happen. It's just they just haven't taken that forward yet. Self-employment is another area that we hear is often quite problematic in terms of some of the calculation, because it's possible for the non-resident parent to use self-employment as a way to kind of hide income or to declare income in different ways, which means that the receiving parent will then not get the full amount that they should be getting. So that's the key challenges we hear from parents with care. In fact, almost half of parents with care reported that there were assets were not included in the maintenance calculation. And that sometimes the CMS's rigid approach for calculating maintenance payments didn't account for some complexities, and going backwards and forwards to the CMS can be challenging. I had an email from somebody this morning, actually, who was trying to get the assets of her ex taken into account, and had sent a screenshot through the digital system to show his limited company, and then it just been rejected on the basis that she hadn't given any evidence. And when she'd given the evidence, she then rang up, was then on the phone for hours, and then got told that she needed to raise something else through the digital system again. So it's a really complex system, and actually goes against what some of the officials were saying last week about parents themselves not having to give that evidence. There is a bit on the digital site where you can upload that evidence. So we hear regularly that there is a focus, there is an ask from the CMS to ask those receiving parents to show evidence of extra income, which, when we've got cases where there is significant levels of domestic abuse, can be really challenging for the receiving parents. Non-resident parents in our survey also showed challenges around where their salaries weren't properly accounted for, and I don't know that Dave might have something a bit more to say about that in terms of some of the research they've done around the kind of your income has to change by 25% before the calculation can be redone in year. So that's a challenge we hear from receiving parents.
Dave.
So just to respond a little bit to the sort of the framing of this question in terms of sort of the realities of kind of the sort of structure of income across families. So I think what Sam said, that we have sort of moved to a greater degree of sort of gender equality is true, but we've not gone all the way. So if you look at couples who have children, then very characteristic, you see that one parent at the point when they have children, takes a step back from the labour market, whilst the other actually increases their earnings. So there is a real sort of characteristic division of labour within families across the UK, where one parent is spending more of their time and their energies sort of caring for and nurturing the children, whilst the other parent is spending more time out in the labour market earning money, and that's what supports the family. So clearly, when parents separate and the children are predominantly with one of those parents, then those that need for care and nurture doesn't go away, and so you are left with this situation where, with a family with just one adult looking after the children, then generally that is going to be the lower income parent. So we have sort of considered within our research sort of the case for reforming the formula to try and take into account both parents' incomes, and where we're sort of heading to, the conclusion that we're sort of heading towards is that the benefits of doing that, so that there are clearly going to be some cases where the parent with care has a higher income than the paying parent, but they're relatively rare, and so then the sort of the cost and complexity of creating this new system, where actually the net result of it would, in the vast majority of cases, continue to be the non-resident parent paying money over to the parent with care. It probably doesn't justify sort of reopening the formula in that kind of way.
Thank you for that. I mean, just in terms of the calculation and certainly the sort of online tool. What changes would you look to make to that? Because it feels to me as if the online tool is quite rigid. There are certain things you put in. Obviously, you can put salary in. It feels to me that actually a slightly more in-depth calculator, where you could put different salary types in, would actually sort of help this, and perhaps that affordability check there as well may not scare off non-resident parents when they're looking to set that. And also, I wonder whether there is an argument or certainly a discussion to be had around a child maintenance payment is one thing. How much time you spend with your children as a non-resident parent is quite a different thing. And again, it feels to me as if the online tool sort of tries to bolt those two together. That if my child spends 1 night a week, 2 nights a week, 5 nights a week with me, this is the direction of the calculation. When in fact the calculation is one thing, and then the time you spend with your children as a parent is quite another thing. What sort of changes would you like to see in the way that it is calculated, and perhaps the access that parents have to that system in the early days, which then, I think a number of you have mentioned this, it doesn't sort of scare parents off straight away and just say, we're just going to completely disengage from this. Sarah?
Yep, so there was a proposal in the most recent consultation by the DWP to make that online tool a lot better, and to actually look at the possibilities of whether you could actually match it up with government verified sources of income. So obviously if that happened, then some of the challenges that Sam was highlighting around some of the other areas when you go through the calculation, whether it takes into account different bits of whether you have other children to look after and that kind of thing, like they were looking to make that tool more sophisticated, and that would be something that we would definitely support.
I think within the tool itself, there could be... the problem is the tool is dealing with the calculation as it is. The problems of the calculation are going to feed into the tool, whichever way you design it. But what the tool doesn't have, it doesn't recognise the potential for variation for the costs of having contact with your child. So maybe that could be built into the calculation. The other thing it doesn't also recognise is that there is this slight, and you'd have to be an expert in this area, between the difference between 50-50 care and equal shared care. Under the child maintenance system, you have something called equal shared care, where you are generally sharing all the decision making, and it's not just about time. In those circumstances, maintenance is not payable if it is genuine, but the calculation tool doesn't recognise that. It goes straight into the 50-50 calculation, which means that if you're a non-resident parent, you're still paying maintenance to the resident parent. But it's also just the messaging around it. As I understand it, under the previous child maintenance options, there was language around it, there were leaflets around it saying that this might not be the best tool for you, this might not come up with the best realistic calculation in your particular circumstances. So maybe there does need to be a caveat within the calculation tool which says this might not be appropriate in your circumstances. And as I understand it, there were these other leaflets which talked about, sharing care doesn't have to be financial. It could be, if it is financial, then those regular payments might not always be realistic. They have to be realistic, they have to be reasonable. Financial help can be provided through other means, like paying off the mobile phone bill, or by buying the school uniform, or by buying the football kit. And there are other ways that both parents can work together. So I think if there's that messaging together with those tweaks to the tool, then hopefully that will just encourage people more to come to their own arrangement and use the tool as part of that.
Sorry, and I did also just want to say that absolutely those two things should be separate. It is absolutely that the contact with your children and the money you pay through child maintenance is an entirely separate process and shouldn't be confused. And I think that's sometimes where issues do arise in conflict between separated parents as well.
Absolutely. Dave, anything to add on
that? So I suppose one of the issues that we've run into speaking with parents is that the formula, although it's sort of like laid out quite how it works, the sort of the reasoning behind it can be difficult to understand, and that particularly sort of applies where the the sort of the lower income end kind of protections against payments being unaffordable reside, because those have been sort of set in legislation and they've not uprated with inflation. So it means some quite sort of peculiar dynamics. If you were to sort of have uprated those by inflation, then some parents would be paying more and some parents would be paying less because of the strange way that formula is implemented. So as part of that, the DWP review of the formula, one of the things that they should be doing is spelling out sort of very clearly each step through the formula, what the sort of the rationale and the reasoning is, and keeping that live, so that as circumstances do change in the economy, that the formula updates to reflect that and remains a principles-based formula.
Thank you.
Lord Bradley, you might want to declare your interest at the start of your comments.
I have no interest to declare. And apologies for having to leave the meeting briefly, and therefore if you've already answered this question, just refer me to what you've already said. But there's a theme that runs through about the increased use of technology, making it more sensitive but still remote, and particularly for domestic abuse cases. We've heard from officials that their drive is to increase and improve technology, but is there a case to look more carefully at the opportunities for more face-to-face interviews and discussions in appropriate settings for people who may be suffering from, say, domestic abuse, to enable them, or even giving evidence of support on the calculation of the income, so there's a more sort of personal relationship with the caseworker rather than just being at the end of a telephone that's been described.
And the things that it's not something that has come up necessarily from the parents we speak to. That the idea of having a more personal relationship with the caseworker certainly has, and the idea of being able to have, you know, a named caseworker that you speak to consistently is something that we would definitely be recommending, because lots of people, particularly when you're a victim survivor of domestic abuse, having to tell your story over and over again is really traumatizing, and actually it slows everything down as well, because if someone's much more familiar with your case, they can understand what's happened before, where payments haven't been made. Otherwise you're starting all over again, and it delays kind of enforcement issues and everything else. I think it's also really interesting in terms of the digital stuff, because actually what we hear is that it's how it's working at the moment isn't working very well. People are still having to use the phone in a lot of cases, and waiting hours on the phone to actually get someone that they speak to. So I think there's actually potentially there is a case for more face-to-face support. I could definitely see the benefits of that, but actually there's a real need to improve what the digital service actually does, and that came up consistently in our research actually, that and there wasn't necessarily a paper trail in terms of, you know, you'd speak to somebody on the phone, you'd go onto the digital, onto your case online, and there wasn't necessarily recording what was said, and then you get a letter which says something different to what you thought, and then you get another letter which is dated the same day which says something completely different, and that kind of trying to sort of follow that trail through and trying to understand what the current situation is without spending another 2 hours waiting on the phone is it's a real challenge. So I think there's a real case for proper improvements to the digital service, but perhaps also there's not something we've explored necessarily, but I could see the benefits of that face-to-face support as well.
Lord Shipley.
It's been very, very interesting and helpful so far, may I say. Can I move us on now just to discuss enforcement and the effectiveness of the child maintenance service in enforcing child maintenance agreements, and how you think that could be improved? And if you want to put it into context of the current consultation, well, that is completed, but on which we're expecting some forthcoming reforms, such as changes to the direct pay system or the introduction of administrative liability orders. I mean, what do you think of CMS and enforcement? Mr. Morfey, can we start with you?
Well, a proper enforcement regime needs to be in place, and we support that. Certainly and I can understand all the proposals which have been put forward. I can understand each one of them. I'm going to come back to this basic issue. I think if there's a parent who can pay and won't pay and is evading their responsibilities, clearly the strongest enforcement must be possible in those circumstances. The problem we have, I think, is that 40% of the people who are in the system are below the income tax threshold, and 58% of the people on collect and pay are below the income tax threshold. So the vast majority of the people are in a position of desperate unaffordability of the calculations. And I'm not saying anything which hasn't already been said by the Public Accounts Committee in 2022 and the Social Security Advisory Committee a couple of years earlier, but they're saying the big problem here, you can have all the enforcement in the world, but if you have a system where the vast majority of people just cannot afford to make the contribution and see the system as unfair and unaffordable, then all your attempts to improve enforcement, which is something which we would support, are always going to be hitting the buffers the whole time. So I'm not trying to dismiss the importance of improving enforcement, but I think it does go hand in hand. It can't be separated from the problems which are causing the arrears to go up in the first place. So I think it is totally appropriate in those circumstances where people can afford to pay. I would ask the CMS to look again at something which was done with the CSA, where if they are struggling with a parent who cannot make the entire payment, to look at the possibility of part payment, because surely some money is better than no money, and going down this route where you just hit this buffer where the CMS are trying to do everything to try to enforce a difficult situation. If part payment could be brought back into the system, then surely if it can get more money to the children and to those households, then it has to be a good thing.
What we hear from parents with care is a reluctance from the CMS to take forward some of the enforcement powers that they do have. They do have quite a wide-ranging level of enforcement powers, yet in our survey 61% of parents reported that CMS were reluctant to use those enforcement powers. And one of the big challenges around that is when you are on direct pay. If there are missed payments, you have to start reporting those to the CMS and then get the case moved to collect and pay. So we do support, in principle, the consultation, the reforms proposed in the recent consultation that would mean effectively all cases are collect and pay, because that would allow the CMS to be able to properly monitor who is paying and who is not, and then be able to put those enforcement measures in place where payments aren't being made. At the moment, we see massive delays in terms of that movement over to collect and pay, and then quite often we see sort of a bit of a ping pong backwards and forwards between the two, where actually this person isn't paying, so when they're on collect and pay, that is much better in terms of actually being able to see who is paying and who isn't. And what we also see, arrears are growing, but the last quarter that we saw, the stats for, despite the fact that 27.5 million was unpaid, there was only one prison sentence, there was no passport quantifications and one driving disqualification. So some of those more harsher measures aren't being used. And even some of the lower down measures in terms of whether using deduction orders, which means you're taking money directly from bank accounts, they're not used as widely as they could be.
Could I just ask you that if the harsher measures are not being used, are you advocating that they should be, or do you think it's a reflection of the fact that perhaps those who might serve the enforcement actually are doubtful about the grounds?
I think it's just demonstrative of the fact that you've got people who are persistently not paying. These powers have been put in place for the CMS to follow them up, and despite the persistent non-paying, they are still not using those powers.
Dave Hawkey.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'd echo that from our experience that there's a sort of, and I think this relates to some of the things that we've been speaking about previously about the sort of the extent to which the CMS is adequately resourced, and so that sort of feeds through to its capacity to take forward its enforcement action. In relation to liability orders, sort of what people have told us is that whilst that does sort of mean that enforcement action can be taken, those orders can be put in place quickly, it's generally not seem to be having much effect on the CMS actually taking enforcement action, with resident parents having to chase that up, and I think that sort of reflects that sort of the lack of resource within that system.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Could I, in one sense, the evidence we're getting is quite negative. It's all the problems which we asked you for, so we've received that. But could I ask you just briefly to comment on what you think when you have a functional CMS arrangement, one that works, what does it look like and why does it work? Sam?
I think I come back to this analogy with the tax system. If it's seen to be reasonable, it's seen to be fair, it's seen to be affordable, then people are more likely to go along with it. And also if they are, the problem which I find with our dads is that if there is any resistance to them paying, it's because, well, I'm not seeing the child. Why should she, she's been so mean to me. She's stopping me seeing my child for absolutely no reason. And now they're asking me to pay money when I'm paying all this other money towards the household, and now child maintenance in a very brusque way is coming after me. So I think the issue is that if they are functioning in an amicable relationship, and they're both working together and both making a positive contribution and recognising the role which both parents are playing, then clearly that's going to be a better situation to make child maintenance. So these things, I think, do have to be seen in the round. I agree, Sarah, you do have to keep child maintenance and child arrangements separately, but they do inevitably become intertwined. And a bad situation on one hand will often toxify the other the other side.
Yes, that's a good point.
All right.
I think the key for the parents that we talk to is being able to receive consistent payments that they can rely on. We know that single parent households are more than twice as likely to be in poverty than couple households, and quite often we hear from parents that they won't necessarily incorporate the child maintenance into their kind of monthly planning because they're not guaranteed to get it. They don't think they're necessarily going to get it. So the real important thing for single parents is that they are consistently receiving that. I did actually hear someone say that during COVID, when they were just getting an automatic, they got the uplift in universal credit, that kind of really helped because there was an additional bit of money coming to the household, and then there was kind of the £7 coming in, and that was really helpful just in terms of getting some of the consistency. Obviously, we believe that the non-resident parents should be paying their fair share and should be paying, if they are high income, then they should be contributing in that way. But the consistency of payment is really important.
Dave?
So I think one sort of response to this is to think what a sort of a well-functioning child maintenance service would do. So not necessarily an effective arrangement, because the real key here, or sort of like the goal, should be to recognise that there are parents who, when they're separating, that they are going through a difficult period, and that there may well be conflict. And if the child maintenance service is part of helping to diffuse that conflict and help reach an arrangement, whereas at the moment what we see is, because of the sort of the systems of incentives baked into it, and the sort of the lack of care that I think Sarah has been talking about in terms of the ways in which parents are treated, then it can be sort of an accelerant to conflict. So I think trying to think about a better child maintenance service to help the cases that might start off as difficult cases to become sort of less difficult, I think would be a priority. And then also, I just wanted to make a comment on this point about the role of child maintenance in alleviating poverty. I think that is an important sort of consequence that child maintenance payments can have, and it is clearly a reason, as the government is sort of developing its child poverty strategy, that it should be sort of thinking about how that child maintenance service can be doing more to make sure that more parents do sort of manage to reach arrangements. But I think also within that, we also just do need to be conscious of some of the things that Sam has been saying about sort of affordability, particularly because the non-resident parents, the group of non-resident parents who are not paying maintenance, do skew to the bottom end of the income distribution. So I think we need to be clear-eyed that as we, if this is successful in expanding the number of families who do actually have a successful arrangement in place, then the anti-poverty impact will be important, but it might be less than that we see with the parents who currently have an arrangement.
Ernest Cass.
The thing that's really coming across to me from is that unsurprisingly you're seeing very different cohorts of parents, and there's a huge spectrum from what Lord Benclathra just described as the almost aggressively not wishing to pay in a punitive way, through to those who may be evasive about income and all of those issues, through to intent to pay but unable to manage it or manage it in a consistent way, and then those that are happily paying and it's all working seamlessly. And I get the impression that and I'm not wanting to put words in your mouth, that you're feeling that the system lacks nuance to manage in a differential way according to the intent of the non-resident paying parent. Is that a fair comment?
I mean, I totally accept it. It's a very difficult, it's such a difficult environment for the government and for agencies to be working in anyway. And so it's and of course if resources are stretched, which they are, then the ability to have the resources to be able to have that nuance is of course going to be stretched. But I think there are fundamental things that it's trying to, and I'm sorry to keep coming back to this issue about the affordability, but a lot of the problems do come from that. And then trying to have to grapple with these different circumstances. I think a lot of those problems could be alleviated by having a system which both the paying parent and the receiving parent are happy with. Yes, even within that, there's of course always going to be variations and there's going to be that spectrum, but I think a large part of that problem of trying to deal with these terribly intractable and difficult situations would be alleviated to some extent if they could, things which are within the control of the CMS are actually dealt with, and the calculation is one of them.
I think your point really points to the importance of better trained staff, but also the real need for that kind of much more kind of personalised caseworker system, because actually if you had somebody who was regularly speaking to the same people, they would much more get that nuance of who they were actually speaking to and what's happening on both sides to be able to make those decisions much more fairly.
Thanks. Baroness Coffey, then I'll come to Lord Prentice.
Oh, thank you. I've got two strands. One is Mr. Morfey, you mentioned how few people are paying income tax, so clearly that suggests they're not really working, and that's a high proportion. What do you think would happen, I'd be interested to hear from all three of you, if they became an active cohort for DWP to put into intensive work search? Because ultimately this is about tackling children not having a lot of money to live on. I wanted to get a sense of that. Yeah. And my second question would be a bit more broadly perhaps, what your experiences of ICE. 60% of cases they held up of the ones they investigate in terms of complaints against DWP, but even then that's fewer than 500 cases. So I just wanted to get a feel of whether ICE is fit for purpose. I don't think I have any declarations of interest.
Right. So I missed the first part of, you said if the DWP put them into...
So the majority of people, it seems, in difficulty, don't seem to be working, or not working a lot.
Yes.
Should they be proactively, by DWP, be put into the intensive work search programme? It's even more so than perhaps regular, recognising to try and boost the amount of money or the affordability for young people, for the children. I am conscious people fear that could lead to conflict, but I'd be interested in your thoughts.
I think philosophically that's something which we would support, because I think it's all part of being a responsible parent. If you want to be the good role model for your child, if you're contributing to society and having a job and going out to work and earning a salary, then I think that is a good role model for any child. So from that perspective, I would support it. I think it would have to be looked at how that interacts with universal credit, because at that lower paid level, if you're on the basic rate, and I know I think the Public Affairs Committee looked at this, if you are on a very low salary, let's say, or a low salary of £200 a week, once you start working, because of the tapering off of the universal credit, combined, and this is if they're on the collect and pay system, which might always be relevant going forward, but combined with the loss of benefit, and you are now within the system and paying on the formula, you actually have a marginal tax rate of somewhere between 80 and 95%, which is far higher than the general population at that level. So I think philosophically I support that, but it has to be looked at how that interacts with the social security system, because at the moment there's a disincentive to work which is even stronger if you are a separated parent, where you are treated not as a parent, but you're treated as a single adult, like everyone else, with all the contact costs which I talked about. But that loss of universal credit at the lower end does mean that work in those circumstances doesn't pay.
Sorry, do you want to add?
It's not something that we've thought about a great deal. I can see the attractions of trying to encourage the non-resident parents who aren't in work to find work. But it's not something we've kind of really looked at or considered. Dave?
I'm not quite sure sort of how the proposal would work with what the sanction would be, or whether this is about sort of like trying to provide more support for the non-resident parents to sort of overcome some of the barriers that they might face to work. One thing I would sort of underscore, though, I think trying to integrate the thinking about sort of child maintenance and how child maintenance works with that sort of the child poverty strategy and with thinking about how social security works is going to be really important. And I think we need to recognise that there are some cases where there may well be sort of money within the separated family that a better child maintenance arrangement would alleviate that child poverty or the child poverty risk. But there are also many cases where that may well not be the case, and that if the strategy is sort of recognising, as Sarah was saying, the high rates of child poverty where children live with one adult, that there's a case for thinking more holistically and more broadly about that, and thinking about the role of universal credit and the levels that universal credit has been set at as playing a contribution to reducing that rate of child poverty.
And views on ICE?
I'm not familiar with it, actually. I'm not quite sure. Was it NICE or ICE?
ICE, the Independent Case Examiner.
Sorry, that's not something that I've looked at most.
We might have some other things I can send through. I haven't got anything immediate to mind, but thank you.
Well, if you do find anything on reflection, we'd be more than happy to receive it. We'll go to Lord Prentice now for the last question.
Okay. My question actually, it comes from something that Lord Shipley was talking to you about. And I mean, throughout this morning, you've made some very sobering comments about the service itself. I think you, Sarah, referred to it being insular and poor reputation. I think you, Sam, if I remember right, said it was a bad system. And Dave, if he can hear me, he talked about it being a disincentive and pushing people into family-friendly arrangements. Now, these are all things that we will look at as a committee, but we do have to make recommendations. So pulling those threads together, what recommendations should this committee make to the government?
We might limit you to 2 each, otherwise.
Yeah. What are the main ones?
Yeah. So, for parents with care, one of the real issues around that kind of lack of trust is around enforcement. So, any measures that would improve the enforcement, whether that is an entire movement over to collect and pay, or because that certainly would speed things up. But then looking at other ways to make sure that the assessment's done initially. And then the other key one that just comes up time and time again for us is that named caseworker. Yeah. Just having someone that you can talk to who you know knows your case, so you don't have to explain yourself over and over again. That would help with enforcement, but it would also help with the overall experience of the service and increase that trust.
For me, it'd be get on with the review of the calculation.
Yeah.
I understand that is going. I think it is absolutely fundamental that review is properly done. It needs to be a system which is fair and affordable, both for the parents and for the government, and is seen to be fair as well. I think that calculation is at the heart, and this is not just me saying this, it's been recognised for a number of years. I think that is the heart of it, but also I think it has to be part of a coherent cross-departmental look at how we deal with children of separated parents. It's not just to do it interacts with the social security system, it interacts with the court system, and we're in favour of a lot of the initiatives which are going through to try to keep people out of court. I think that's a good thing. I think it has to be seen as an holistic whole. And I'm throwing this one out there. This is not for this committee, but what would be really good is if there is a minister or an agency within the government, whether that's cross-departmental or cross-agency, which is looking at the welfare of children of separated parents. Because at the moment, when parents separated, once they get into court, they become under the auspices of the Ministry of Justice. But until that point, there's a number of different ministries which they're touched upon. And if there was one agency which was just, and it could be cross-departmental, just looking at issues of welfare with separated parents, I think one person just focused on this, or one agency focused on this, working across department, then that would really aid this kind of holistic policy, which I think we all want to see.
Dave?
Yeah, I think those are all very good recommendations. I think one, just to add something that I think we've sort of circled around a few times in the discussion, is the sort of the training resource within the child maintenance service, making sure that case handlers sort of are able to deal with parents in an appropriate way, and have sort of full command of the system, and particularly when it gets into complex cases, and so making sure that parents have the support they need in order to navigate that system.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Lord Macassar just wanted to come in.
I hope you can be brief in this, but it's a simple little question. Have you any views on the formula? As you were talking, I've been looking through the latest regulations, about 50 sections, and when the civil servants take into account the historic income rate, the current income rate, the flat rate, the self-employed rate, and then apply a formula which makes Einstein's look simple, to my mind, how on earth can civil servants be expected to operate that and families to understand it? So have you any views on simplification, or is that just wishful thinking? Well, Sarah, have you any?
It's something that actually the main thing that parents talk to us about is about the kind of additional assets being taken into account, and I guess that is a bit about the kind of clarity about the different elements, things that are kind of incorporated into the calculation. So where there's non-earned income and where there's unearned income and where there's kind of self-employment, that's usually the issue that comes up for us when we talk to parents about the calculation.
There's possibly an error in the formula, or the formula needs to be tweaked to take that into account.
Yeah.
Okay, Sam, and then Dave.
Well, there's either tweaks or there's complete overhaul. I mean, I would look at, if there's a complete, in an ideal system, I think you'd look at sharing of costs and sharing of income. So you would set out to have a basic support allowance. What is the basic amount that each parent needs to have a dignified life and to be able to contribute to their child, and then have a set formula, a very basic rate above that. That would be the ideal situation. And you also look at the costs of bringing up a child, and look at each parent's ability to pay and the amount of care which they're putting in, and to come up with a formula. That would be the ideal situation, but that obviously is longer term. Short term, I would probably do away with the reduced rate. I think those thresholds have not been changed since 1998 when they were put forward, and they are no longer applicable. If you look at the rises in income and national minimum wage and social security benefits, they are completely outdated in terms of what is the level or at the lower end. So that can be done away with. I would obviously look at the situation of the resident parent. But my main thing is that it needs to be simplified by looking at what is a basic standard of living that both parents can live in dignity, and then look at a simplified formula above that, and having proper account of the costs of staying in contact. If you're the non-resident parent, those costs need to be properly taken into account, because we want to incentivise people to step up to their responsibilities, want to incentivise them to be involved with their children. And at the moment, the system where those costs, whether it's the additional legal costs or it's the additional contact centre costs or additional costs of travel accommodation, those are not taken into account. And at the moment, it's acting as a disincentive. And we surely want a different system to that.
Thank you, Sam. Dave, any views on that?
As I mentioned earlier, I think making sure that the principles that underlie the formula are set out clearly, and that then means that it is kept up to date. As Sam was saying, those thresholds are very, very dated now. I think the point about sort of thinking about the income that families need to live a decent standard of living is really important, but that should be something that's sort of there as a general principle across all of the kind of support that government gives to families. And so that should also be something that informs how Social Security works, because obviously not all single parents have, there is the other parent would be available. So they may have died, for example. And so that question about sort of a minimum standard that people should be able to expect when they live in the UK as the combination of Social Security and work, I think that should sort of inform more broadly the approach to child poverty.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Would it be fair for us to say that, I mean, I'm hoping this might just need a yes or a no answer. Is there a difference of quality of the system depending on which office you go to and which area you're in? So people have different experiences. Is that partly the office, the person they speak to? What I was thinking of was some sort of recommendation from us about supporting the staff within the agency in terms of development and enhancing their skills. But is there a difference in quality depending on who you get to speak to?
People do tell us that they get very different experiences.
They do?
Yeah.
So it might go all right if you get somebody, but not if you go sense.
Yeah, and they get told different things by different people.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I think that's we'll draw this particular meeting to a close now. Thank you very much indeed. Very grateful for the time you've given us, which is more than the time we asked. So we appreciate that, and you've certainly helped us to have a better understanding of the system. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.